I think a lot of people are sort of desperate for more conclusions towards the open world, other than it's complicated. And I I take that sense of wanting to frame complex situations in a way that is immediate, tangible, and actionable for people without being jaded or naive. Like a full bodied apprehension of everything to the best of my ability, all human attempts at solving a given problem, where I went wrong, and what the fuck we can do about it, right? And I think integral conflict, I mean, in terms of out of all the books I could have started reading, probably lays out the best foundation for that thirst, for that quest of actionable, well aged knowledge, right? And this little episode is basically going, for my own sake, is basically going to be going over word for word the six key elements they conclude what defines the integral conflict approach to studying and mediating conflicts, complex conflicts. So I'm going to start off just by briefly going over the five elements of integral conflict in integral theory, the four quadrants, stages and levels of development, the notion that systems over time build on top of prior stages. One stage is the foundation for the next, and the transitional lines of development, which is to say that capacity increases in strategies of interacting and engaging against a given domain of reality. Those changes also happen over time, but do not necessarily build off each other. States of conflict, which is to say that if you take the perspective of a given agent in a system, there are, if you analyze that agent with respect to their own apprehension of reality, their own concept of what a given moment is, there are more transient states that you can, more transient things that you could define for that agent, and that's states. So all that is like very jargonese way of saying that, an athlete in a game in the moment has a hydration level, how much they're sweating, their anger at their opponent. All those things are stateful, against more broader things like transitional lines. So for an athlete, it'd be like what level of how well do they control their body, just physical intelligence versus how well they can read the unfolding of a plague from the opposition. All those things, the transitional stuff, against fundamental stages of development, against an orienting mode of inquiry within the four quadrants. And then beyond all that stuff is the typology, which is to say, like, there's a certain color, certain expressivity for all four of those things that are aforementioned that are separate but relevant. So, gender, I'm still not even sure if I'm using it right. Whether you have a more masculine or feminine approach, depending on how you want to define that duality, I'm not going to touch that because that requires a thorough unfolding. But there's also like more less controversial things like personality types. There are types of economic systems. There are types of kinship models for cultural collectives, body types in the objective singular, stuff like that. So we're going to go into the six tenets. And the first one, integral conflict, is inquiry driven as opposed to being discipline driven. And I think this is one of the biggest loads off my back to read, because as a weirdo who was pretty much raised by a computer, you can pretty much drive Google at the level of inquiry without getting caught up with cultural artifacts of, oh, we like this, we are a tribe of people that think about this problem in this way. No, like one of the positive aspects of ADHD and remix culture is you can kind of skim and scan and piece together the tenets of disciplines that are most relevant to the inquiry that's driving your Google searches. Inquiry driven rather than disciplinary driven, with the intention of developing knowledge of a conflict for the purpose of taking action. And this other part of the statement kind of resolves the mind-body dilemma of, oh, I'm so aware of all of what goes on in conflict, but I don't do anything, versus, oh, I'm so involved in all this conflict, but I'm not affecting anything. So this kind of resolves it. You use the mind to leverage in the heat of the moment, and integral theory calls that embodied mind-body state being a centaur, which I think is pretty cool. Second one, focusing on the construction of knowledge. A focus on the construction of knowledge with the appreciation for the surfacing of underlying assumptions of the quadrant through which each discipline constructs its knowledge. Now, this is pretty amazing and so nourishing to read, and like it's so expressive and a nice way to put this. It's basically saying every single person in the heat of the moment, they feel as if they know something. You're not trying to pull the rug underneath everyone, but to bring the gradient and texture that comes with like the intuitionistic notion that not everyone can win in a dilemma. You have to take their construction of knowledge and you have to appreciate how those underlying assumptions that the construction of knowledge is using emerges from the quadrants through which the individual is oriented. So instead of basically taking a sort of flat notion of what do you think, A, B, or C, they they choose one of the multiple choice answers, and then you invert the control and you say what their choice says about them with respect to the underlying assumptions that govern that choice and the quadrant that is necessary for that underlying assumption, which is huge for this notion of reconciliation within a conflict, because you can show someone you understand where they're coming from with their assumptions, and you can kind of attempt to draw a bridge from where they're at and the assumptions they're taking and what is required to, in one way or another, move on in the open world. The third one, meaning and organization of knowledge. A focus on meaning and organization of knowledge, moving from simple thought based on reduction and disjunction to complex thought that acknowledges the crucial importance of contextualization and connection. I'm going to fix that typo real quick because that's bothering me. What's this called? That's called key elements. And this is the third slide. I forgot which word was spelled. Acknowledges. Alright, there you go. Okay, so meaning and organization of knowledge. Okay, this is a little bit beyond my ability to narrate right next to it, so I kind of have to dive in. So simple thought based on reduction and disjunction to complex thought that acknowledges the crucial importance of contextualization and connection. Okay, so if I were to understand this, basically when you are using a mode of logic, you are given construction and elimination rules. And I think, how does construction relate to reduction? So when you construct something, you basically take some type of ontological thing for granted. It's like, yeah, it's there. This is my axiom. It's going to be there. I'm going to build on top of it. And you are using that construction to reduce some relationship with the outside world. So I guess that's control. And disjunction is the notion of taking expressions and having it to its most core axiomatic construction, right? So basically, reduction and destruction are related to a mode of obviousness that exists in logic, but the complex thought acknowledges that that mode of logic is only relevant given a context and connection to something in the outside world. So, hard rules are inherently relational, and I think part of this movement to complex or integral thoughts are basically saying, okay, this mode of logic is effective, but what is making it effective? Which moves you to the simplistic lens in a context and connection to other modes of logic that sustain each other and are co-executing. I'm not 1,000% sure that's right, but that was my best attempt. Fourth one, reintegration of the knower. The reintegration of the knower, the intervener, which means that rather than attempting to eliminate the knower or intervener, the focus becomes one of making transparent the intervener's assumptions and biases in the process through which she or he constructs knowledge of conflict. Okay, so this is pretty much saying that if you can make your assumptions first-class citizens and do your best to confront and expose your thought processes into the open world, and you have a set of peers that can kind of do accounting on them, the whole dilemma of bias and prejudice becomes less intense. It's still absolutely there, but I think the naivety of trying to remove it by not, I don't know, this one's kind of complicated, but I understand on an intuitive level that if you wear your assumptions on your sleeve that drive what is motivating your experiment or your attempt at mediating conflict, you can be involved in the arena, and you are, or within the realm of progress. I guess that's the best way I can put it. But my understanding of the third and fourth are pretty poor. The fifth one, return of the sacred. The return of the sacred that acknowledges a sense of the numinous in our daily lives, wherein we acknowledge, I misspelled words, numinous, wherein we acknowledge our companionship and communion with one another and the holy other. I think I tried to capture this one by tagging the phrase worthy adversary. They use the phrase holy other. Just real quick, I want to look up. Fine. Numinous, having a strong religious or spiritual quality, indicating or suggesting the presence of a divinity. Oh, that's a nice word. Wasn't necessary. I thought it had to do with numbers. Dumb on me. That's a cool word. Basically saying that if you like yourself, you have to recognize yourself as relating to a greater whole to which everyone else identifies, and that's the whole the simplest way that you can capture a sense of sacredness. You know, if you're going to appreciate anything, and you are going to apprehend that appreciation, you kind of have to see the property that it extends to everything in a reasonable way. And then you take that notion, you combine it with the heat of conflict, and you don't try to reduce one to the other and just accept both things that are happening at once. You don't try to destroy otherness, you just apprehend otherness with that same sense of sacred. The sixth one, evolutionary worldview. An adherence to an evolutionary worldview which acknowledges an overarching order in the universe based on stages of development, the evolving structures that sustain them, and emergence, the process by which development occurs, aka self-organization. Now, to me, I always try to figure out ways to get this thought out there in as elegant of a way as possible, because to me, I like it. This is one of my foundations to which I base, it's why I have a sense of humor about being alive. It's why I smile when I have no idea what I'm doing, because I understand that, like, you can put yourself in positions where if you act in good faith, there's going to be a reward out of it. Now, it's not obvious, it's not inherent in the universe, but there is this thread, this current of self-similar abstract, self-similar systems that kind of incubate and unfold, over and over and over again, and the evolving structures that sustain them, and the development that exists in the open world, in apprehending the fact that these things happen on their own, with the sense of emergence. It's very it's like it's the best way to have faith possible, I feel. And I don't really know how to cleverly frame it, let alone argue for it, or whether arguing is even worth my time. But yeah, again, I I think about 2 weeks in reading this book, and I am absolutely clueless about how I can use these ideas to make integral content about integral conflict. But I'm so excited and earnestly aware of how challenging it's going to be. To which I say, I will be engaged. That was quite buy this book, it's good.